do the introduction?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you all. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations on whose unceded lands we live and work today. I will be hosting the GDP Stream's published book talks today, a series where we celebrate the full and proper publications of important books published by our ADI researchers, which is usually the culmination of several years of care and effort and time. So today's talk will proceed in the form of a book discussion, and neither the author, Professor Ihsan Yilmaz, and neither its discussant, Professor Greg Barton, need an introduction here, really. So very briefly, our author today, Professor Ihsan Yilmaz, is the research chair in Islamic Studies and Intercultural Dialogue at the Alfred Deakin Institute, and Professor Greg Barton is our chair in Global Islamic Studies. Ihsan's latest book is called Creating the Desired Citizen, Ideology, State and Islam in Turkey, which was published by Cambridge University Press. I think it's very freshly off the oven too. It's very freshly baked. I think it just came out a couple of months ago, if I'm not mistaken, Ihsan.
A few weeks ago.
Sorry?
A few weeks ago.
A few weeks ago. It's super fresh. Well, congratulations. And without further ado, I'll hand this over to Ihsan and Greg. Thank you so much.
Thank you. For about 10-15 minutes, I'll just try to summarize my book, and then maybe Greg, you can come in, and I will share my screen. Can you see it? Greg, can you see my screen?
No, it's nice and clear. It's only occupying half the screen, of course, because of the way you might want to enlarge the PDF, but otherwise it's fine.
Yeah, okay. I will try to enlarge it.
Yeah.
I think it should.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah. So that's my, of course, title of the book, Creating the Desired Citizen. Actually, the title should be longer, but of course, it's not practical to have everything in the title that I desired. Normally, it is about not just the desired citizen, but also undesired citizens, and also a third category in the hierarchy of citizens that the Turkish state created, a tolerated citizen. And desired citizen project of Turkey, especially the Kemalists, the secularist, nationalist founders of Turkey, is already known, well known, and many people have worked on this, that how these Kemalists try to create a Turkish nationalist and secularist pro-Western citizens. And by default, this also had its undesired citizens, the people who were targeted to be assimilated, or if not assimilated, dissimulated and purged and so on. And as well known, these are Kurdish citizens, non-Muslims, Alevis, even religious people, religious Sunni Muslims. But the third category, I think I'm the first person who came up with this idea, the tolerated citizens, because I haven't seen anything in the literature previously. Tolerated citizens are the ones that are not as desired, but they are not undesired either. They are just a liminal category in between, and the state is working hard on them to assimilate them further and to make them better citizens. And these are the practicing Muslims who go to state's mosques in Turkey and who are inculcated with the values of the Turkish state ideology. So mainly I look at these three citizen categories in my book, and talk about the nation building project of Turkish state. And I compare two different ideologies here. I mentioned Kemalists. So Kemalists are the ones who established modern Turkey in early 1920s, and then went on to rule Turkey for decades. For the few decades until 1950, Turkey was a one-party state, so there were not real elections, and Republican People's Party ruled Turkey until 1950. But with Turkey's NATO membership, Turkey transitioned towards a multi-party electoral system, but the Kemalists still continue to rule behind the screens. I wouldn't really call it, because it was very obvious. So this was called military tutelage system. So the Turkish military was a very active political actor, and they would limit what the civilian politicians could do and could decide. And on high politics issues such as religion, foreign affairs, minorities, and of course security issues, civilians were not really allowed to make decisions. And through the Senate, all appointed people, not elected, also National Security Council, Constitutional Court, and through the coups, the military generals ruled Turkey and controlled civilian people. When the AKP arrived in early 2000s, and they were not really in power. Yes, they were elected as single party government with 34% of the votes, but because of the reasons I mentioned, they were not able to make decisions on many issues. But gradually, the AKP, Justice and Development Party, today's rulers, they gradually dismantled the Kemalist tutelage. So they started controlling the media, and through some judicial cases, etc., with the European Union support, with the support of many pro-democracy actors and groups in Turkey, they gradually weakened military tutelage. And by 2010, they got rid of this military tutelage. And after that, they started their own nation building project, Citizenship project. And they also have their own desired, undesired, and tolerated citizens. So I am looking also their citizenship categories, these three, and comparing them with the Kemalist and so I am basically comparing these two regimes. So first, I look at the Kemalist project, its desired, undesired, and tolerated citizens. I look at the rise and consolidation of the Kemalist hegemony, and then its desired citizens, what I call Homo lastus. This is actually a new human typology. So these are not just citizens, because the state did not treat the others as proper humans who deserve human rights. So they were dehumanized, demonized, and criminalized because of their ethnic, religious, or political identities, not because of some things that they did, but just because when their identities were manifest, and because these identities were not desired identities, then the state was upset about it. For instance, people were not allowed to speak Kurdish, and actually Turkish state for decades said that there is no language such as Kurdish. It doesn't exist. If a member of the parliament spoke Kurdish in the parliament, for instance, the officers would say that he spoke gibberish. They wouldn't even write down that he spoke in Kurdish. So it was banned, and people who spoke it in the streets, they would be fined. And Alevis, they were not allowed to say that they were Alevis in the streets, and many religious people, Islamist groups, and so on, just because of the books that they were reading, they were imprisoned. So mainly, this desired citizen category, as I called Homo lastus, it's the only human type that is that is worth of protecting in terms of human rights. And what is last year? It is an acronym, Homo lastus. Last year, laicist, Atatürkist, Sunni, and Turkish citizen. So here, laicist, it is based on the French laicite understanding, but it is not really secularism that we are talking about. It is not a political system. We are talking about secularized individuals, mainly people who are not religious. So the state tried to create people who were not religious. Then Atatürkist, this is the ideology of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. It's also called Kemalism. So pro-Western, but Turkish nationalist, authoritarian, and especially militarist. And S here in the last is Sunni Muslim. So non-Sunni ones, such as Alevis, they were not desired either. Because of the majority of the society was Sunni, the state decided to make this the main identity of Turkey. So Sunni Muslims. Of course, this excluded non-Muslims. As you know, Armenians were massacred, more than 1 million of them in 1915, before the establishment of Turkey. There were few Armenians left, but still there were many non-Muslims in Turkey. So gradually they were simply sent away with a population exchange with Greece, for instance, with pogroms and so on. So at the end of the day, Turkey's population is now 99%, according to official figures, 99% Muslim. Just about a century ago, Istanbul's population were more than 30–40% non-Muslims. So they were simply got rid of. And T, the last parameter here in the homolastus formula, Turkish. So this excluded not Armenians, Greeks, etc., but also Kurdish citizens who are 20% of the society. So all these others, so people who were not secular, religious, people who were not Kemalist, but liberal, leftist, etc., people who were not Sunni, but Alevi or non-Muslim, and people who were not Turkish, ethnically Turkish, they were all undesired citizens. So I am looking at how the Kemalist state mistreated them, even punished them, criminalized them, and so on. And then I look at the tolerated citizen very shortly. And the Diyanet. Diyanet is the Turkey's Directorate of Religious Affairs. So even though the state said that it is a secular state, actually they wanted to control religion and use it for political purposes in creating the desired citizens. And I argue also in creating tolerated citizens. So I look at and there are many studies on the Kemalist era as well, Diyanet sermons. So Diyanet in Turkey control all mosques in Turkey and employs all imams. So there are more than 100,000 imams in Turkey and preachers. They are all employed by the state, and it is illegal to be a sort of private imam or have a private mosque in Turkey. You cannot open a mosque that's private. It has to be controlled by the state, and it has to have an imam appointed by the state. And the sermons, Friday sermons, and Muslim males attend by Islamic law. It is compulsory according to Sharia, and about 50–60% of Muslim males in Turkey attend Friday prayers. And it has a sermon component which lasts about 15–20 minutes. It is in Turkish. So this sermon gives a huge propaganda opportunity to the state, and they are centrally written in the headquarters. And there are many studies that analyze the content of these sermons. And rather than talking about spiritual issues, holy issues, etc., the sermons try to create these Turkish nationalist, militarist citizens, and all sorts of anti-Western ideas, conspiracy theories, speaking about others, and trying to create these citizens that would obey the state only, love the state, love the homeland, obey the rulers, etc. So that's the message that's been given to the congregations over many decades. So these are still religious people. So at the end of the day, they are not fully desired citizens because they don't have secular lifestyles. So these people were not allowed to be, unlike desired citizens, these people were not allowed to be military officers, ambassadors, intelligence officers. So all these castles of the Kemalist system. So they were not allowed to infiltrate into these institutions. Because the Kemalist tutelage system simply continued its hegemony through individuals who were in these institutions. So judges, prosecutors, constitutional court members, etc. For instance, constitutional court would simply shut down any party that was slightly pro-Kurdish or pro-Alevi or pro-undecided something. And many Kurdish parties, socialist parties, etc., were closed down by the constitutional court. So these tolerated citizens, yes, they were not criminalized, they were not demonized by the state, and they were actually encouraged to go to wars and get killed. They would become martyrs and so on. So they were tolerated, but there was a sort of glass ceiling for them. So they were not allowed to operate within the state system. So then I look at the Erdoganist ideology, and then I try to show how actually the Erdoganists are trying to do the same thing. So they have their desired citizen. In chapter 8, I look at this, and in detail, because this is new. I think this book is the first book that systematically looks at the Erdoganist nation building and its citizenship project. So I look at these issues in detail. So I look at Erdogan's desired citizen. In this case, it is not secularist, of course, it is Islamist. But still, you have nationalism here, militarism again, conspiracy theories, fears from the West, etc. But they have to be loyal to Erdogan. So unlike Kemalist personality cult here, we have the Erdoganist personality cult. So in the next chapter, creating Erdoganism's desired citizens via popular culture, I look at movies, TV series, soap operas, etc., and how Erdoganism is trying to create a Erdoganist personality cult, and also this militarist rhetoric, Islamist rhetoric, anti-Western conspiracy theories, etc. And then I look at the national curriculum, textbooks, etc., and how Erdoganism is again trying to create its own desired citizens. Islamism is creeping into the curriculum. Evolution theory is out, philosophy is out, religious courses are in, and the content of these things are generally more Islamist and talks about all sorts of conspiracy theories, etc. And then I look at Erdoganism as undesired citizens. Here, of course, Kemalists are the undesired citizens, seculars, liberals, but also some religious groups, again, such as the Gülenists. They are Sunni Muslims, they are practicing Muslims, but because their political understanding is different from the Erdoganists, they are also undesired citizens. Kurds, not all of them, but the ones who do not vote for Erdogan's party, they are undesired citizens. Alevis, again, undesired citizens. Non-Muslims are undesired citizens. So in this chapter, I look at all these. And then I look at the tolerated citizen. And again, Diyanet has a role here. Because now Erdogan has controlled the state, they decided to use Diyanet, similar to Kemalists. So they also have their tolerated citizen. But here, the tolerated citizen is a little bit more Islamist. So the sermons that I analyzed in the next chapter, actually, there are overlaps with the Kemalist Diyanet in terms of Turkish nationalism, in terms of militarism, in terms of obeying the rulers, in terms of loving the homeland, getting killed, being a martyr, etc. But additionally, the sermons talk about jihad and say the Turkish military has a duty to do jihad, overseas operations, and lots of anti-Western conspiracy theories, saving the Muslim world, leading the Islamic world, Turkey being the beacon and leader of the Ummah, etc. So the contents of the sermons is gradually changing towards a more radical direction. And so the tolerated citizens again, are the ones who go to states' mosques and inculcate the values of the Turkish state Islam. But in this case, Turkish state Islam is a more radical one and an Islamist one. Last thing I'll mention about the book, let me stop sharing. Yep. When I looked at these two ideologies, I try to look at it from the perspective of emotions, especially, and how emotions played a role in the radicalization of these two ideologies. Sorry. Because as you know, nation building is not unique to Turkey. It's going on everywhere. And in many countries, actually, it is called state nation instead of nation state, because state actually comes first and then it creates its own nation. This is what happened in Turkey, but this is happening in many other places, and this happened in other places as well. There wasn't a French nation, for instance. The French state created a French nation out of different ethnicities, groups, etc. But what happened in Turkey was very swift, abrupt, and radical. And it cost many lives as well. It was very bloody, and minorities were oppressed, and they've been still oppressed to a great extent. So I look at the reasons why these two ideologies were so radical. And I look at especially emotions in this sense, and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And the Kemalists and the Islamists have two different versions of this story, their own explanations, but there are overlaps. So at the end of the day, it is the Western powers that are guilty of disintegrating the Ottoman Empire in these narratives, in these stories. So for the Kemalists, yes, because of Islam, Ottoman Empire became backward, because Islam is against religion, science, intellect, etc., according to Kemalist imaginations and narratives. Because Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire, it became backwards, and the Western powers became more powerful. And the second main reason is that because of the diversity in the Ottoman Empire. It was so multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual, etc. So the Western powers found it very easy to divide and rule it, and to disintegrate it, and encourage different uprisings, revolts against the empire, etc. Then in the place of the Ottoman lands, now there are more than 50 countries. So their answer to this was to create a homogeneous but also secular nation state. It would be secular, so that not religious, so that with science and progress, etc., the state would be more powerful, it would be open to technology, and so on. And with homogeneous national identity, there wouldn't be any religious, ethnic, political groups that would be abused and used as pawns, as puppets by the Western powers. So in these narratives, you see lots of anti-Western conspiracy theories, nothing about self-criticism. So if you look at the stories, novels, movies, national curriculum, textbooks, etc., produced during the Kemalist era, there is nothing about the Kemalist, Turkish race or Turkish nation, their mistakes, their failures, etc. No, it is all about the external powers. It's all about their ploys and plots and their conspiracies against Turkey. And this is coupled with inferiority complex as well, because knowing that Turkey was behind the West in terms of technology, science, etc., and they were seen as barbarians, uncivilized people, they had this inferiority complex and ontological insecurity. So to come up with these all things, they also propagated the idea of the superior Turkish race that established many states in history. They were so powerful, they created many civilizations. Actually, Turkish language was the only language in the beginning, and all European languages, etc., was created from the Turkish language. And Turkish history thesis, according to this thesis, Turkey was Turks were so powerful, etc. So these insecurities, fears, siege mentality. For instance, in the schools when I was educated, we were always told that Turks do not have enemies. Turks do not have any friends. Turks only have friends who are Turks. That's it. And Turkey is surrounded by enemies. All Turkey's neighbors are enemies of Turkey. And all these anti-Western conspiracy theories, etc. This radicalized their understanding. So whenever there was a democratic demand or a different demand in terms of political representation, etc., from different ethnic minority or religious minority groups, this would be seen with suspicion, and these people would be purged. Whenever they wanted to enter some state ranks, by hiding their identities, of course, otherwise they wouldn't be allowed to be a prosecutor or police officer, an ambassador, etc. Then whenever it was found out that they actually had a different identity, these people would be purged and sometimes even imprisoned. So nowadays, Erdoganists are trying to do the same thing, and they have their own conspiracy theories. In this conspiracy theory, actually Kemalists are also guilty because they are also the pawns and puppets of the Western powers. And it is easy to argue this because the Kemalists were Westernizing elite. They were pro-Western at the end of the day. This is what I call ambivalent Westernism, because on the one hand, they are suspicious of Western powers, but on the other hand, they are trying to create a nation that is pro-Western, that belongs to the Western civilization, that is secular, etc. So for Islamists, Erdoganists, it is easy to say that, oh, these guys, they are actually insider enemies, internal enemies. They try to create a Western nation. They try to create a secular nation. Actually, they were working for Western powers, and they are still working for Western powers. So nowadays, they simply turn the tables, and they are accusing the Kemalists for the same thing, but also Gülenists, because they are pro-European Union, they don't agree with Erdogan on every matters and so on. And some, as I said, Kurds, because they want some autonomy, some Kurdish rights, Kurdish language rights, etc. And it is easy to blame them as enemies of Turkey because simply they want to have a separate nation state, etc. Even though they don't. But the Islamists would easily argue that no, they are not saying it now, but 10 years later, when they are more powerful, they would do it. So any Western criticism on human rights issues, any Western demand for giving more rights to these minorities would be met with this suspicion and conspiracy theories. And when you look at the Turkish movies now, columnists, media, and sermons, you would see all these Erdoganist Islamist conspiracy theories. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ihsan. It's wonderful. Do you want to go into a conversation now? I'll open it up for some questions first.
Up to you.
Well, let me start off by asking you a question, or a couple of questions that might sort of lead off our discussion with the whole group. First of all, congratulations. This is literally the work of a lifetime so far. Hopefully, in the second part of your career, you'll get to write happier topics. But this reflects, your life journey, and we've seen the promise of moving beyond Kemalist authoritarianism and opening up to democracy at the beginning of this century. The circle has turned and we're back to something very similar to Kemalist authoritarianism, but now it's dressed up in Islamist language. But to explain that, could you talk to us about French laicity and how that has shaped, first of all, Kemalist understandings, and how Erdogan has flipped that into his not just desired citizens, but a desired nation that's framed in religious terms, but religion that is controlled by the state?
As you know, the French laïcité is a reaction against the previous regime, ancien regime. So in this case, the clergy was part of the previous oppressive regime. So they were they were seen as enemies of the democratic moves and the French nation, etc. So the French revolutionaries decided that, okay, we should simply get rid of these guys and disempower them. They shouldn't have any power over political issues. So they tried to, similar to the American system where we call a wall of separation, there is a wall between religion and the state. So religion does not influence state affairs, legislation, etc. And in return, state doesn't interfere with religion. So these are autonomous spheres. In England, this is not clear cut, for instance, because you have the monarchy, and the monarchy has to be Anglican, and then in the House of Lords, you have 26 Anglican bishops. They are there in the House of Lords, which is a political institution. It has a political power. They are automatically there just because they are Anglican bishops. That's it. There are many Catholics in the country and people from other religions. They don't have this right. So, and the monarch has to be defender of the faith. And here it's Anglican Church. But in the United States, you see that it is more clear cut. And in France, this was similar, laïcité, but unlike the American example, in France, you had this a little bit aggressive positioning against religion. And Ahmet Kuru, in his book, he looked at this issue and he calls this assertive secularism. So the American one is passive secularism, because you really have a wall of separation. So the state is not simply mistreating religion. It is not against religion. It doesn't really care. But in France, they were not happy with the public manifestations of religion either. So they were not happy that some clergy people would talk about political issues, other issues, and so on. In the United States, everybody can talk. So the Kemalists thought that this would be a great idea, because they were also blaming the ancien regime, saying that the religious people, clergy, etc., they simply obey the rulers, and together they led the Ottoman Empire into its collapse, into disasters. So they were anti-religious people and anti-clergy people. But also, their understanding of laicite was more militant. So they did not really only create a sort of wall of separation, but they tried to eliminate Islam from the public sphere. They tried to secularize society. So when you look at the national curriculum, popular culture, etc., it is all anti-religious. So imams, etc., who are portrayed, for instance, in the novels, in the movies, they're always the bad guys, villains. So there is an active reactionary positioning against religion in the Turkish case. And religious groups, they were not allowed to operate. They were all declared illegal. Religious brotherhoods, Sufi brotherhoods, religious communities. As of today, even, according to the law, these are all illegal. Of course, politicians have tolerated them, turned a blind eye to them, and so on and so on. But when there is a crisis in the country, suddenly prosecutors can just go and imprison these people, saying that, look, this is illegal in Turkey, even as of today. So politicians have used this as a sort of stick against them, saying that, look, if you don't obey, I can send you a prosecutor. So, but on the other hand, as I explained, there was this Diyanet. So while the state was not influenced by religion, it wouldn't accept any input from religion, and actually arguing something on the basis of Islam in Turkey, saying that, look, we should create this law because it is Islamic. It would be nice for Muslims. This was illegal. Any political party that would say that, it would be shut down. But on the other hand, the state controlled all mosques, employed all imams and so on. So this was a one-way street. Because the state knew that if it doesn't control religion, mosques, clergy, and so on, they would be autonomous and they would resist, and there would be pockets of resistance, etc. So by using these institutions, they try to create Turkish state-friendly version of Islam that would always say that obey the rulers, Turkish state is sacred, you have to give your life, sacrifice your life for the state, it is a good thing, you will go to heaven, etc. And nowadays, Erdogan is simply using this psychological infrastructure. So basically what he is doing that, okay, please continue to obey the rulers, obey the state, but in this case, I am the state. So my ideology is state ideology. So he is not really doing radical changes in terms of these state structures, but changing the content of the ideology.
Thank you, Ihsan. There's a lot to unpack, so we need much more time we've got. But Ali's had his hand up for a while, and Balgang has just put his hand up. So we'll go to Ali first, then to Balgang. I imagine in the case of both Iran and China, we can see lots of parallels. But I think we can see lots of parallels around the world with this way that authoritarianism uses existing methods of control, but with a new driver. Anyway, Ali, first of all, please.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Ihsan. Lovely presentation. I have to admit that I've had the pleasure of reading parts of the book, thanks to Ihsan. Highly recommended. Doesn't need my recommendation, but nonetheless, highly recommended and fantastic. I apologize if this is shaky a bit because my computer didn't work, so I have to be on the phone. Look, I have a question. It's more seeking your comment, Ihsan, about the regional repercussions of these definitions of various humans and how it plays out in the politics at a regional scale. I'm particularly drawing your attention to relationships with Azerbaijan, which, as you know, is my personal interest. Recently, for example, we know that the relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan is not recent, of course, for those who may not be familiar with the region. It's a long relationship, just as it is between Iran and Azerbaijan. In the recent war that broke out between Armenia and Azerbaijan, that Azerbaijan prevailed, Turkey played a big role. And recently, earlier this year, Erdogan traveled to Shushi or Shusha, depending on which side of the equation you call it, which the Azeris claim that it is their cultural heart. And I'm quoting one of their official people here saying this. And through that travel that was with the current president of Azerbaijan, after that they went to the parliament, and Erdogan suggested that it would be great to see, and I'm paraphrasing here, it would be great to see this as the cultural heart of the Turkish world, which suggests a kind of both civilizational outlook and possibly an imperial outlook on the part of Erdogan as well. I was wondering how you place this in the context of your book and how you've observed things, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Actually, Erdogan's ideology is not really very pro-Turkish or Turkish nationalist. And if you look at the AKP's policies in Central Asia, actually there wasn't too much focus, and in their narratives either. So this Turkishness was not really there until recently, because they are Islamists, so they are more concerned with the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt and Sunnis in the region, and creating a Sunni land or Sunni world that Turkey would lead. So Central Asia does not really play or Caucasus a prominent role. But of course, Erdoganism is not a homogeneous ideology. It is not a well-defined ideology. It's not like socialism or liberalism and so on. So it is an eclectic ad hoc ideology. It is a work in progress. And Erdogan also is known for his pragmatism. So contradictions are there always. But increasingly imperialist ambitions are there, definitely. So Turkish sphere of influence, and they talk about creating these friendly states there, sort of, you can argue, Lebenswelt. So it's been there. And also these Ottomanist ideas, neo-Ottomanism. So just getting, not maybe in terms of borders and creating a greater Turkey, but in terms of having a sphere of influence. So selling your products there and cooperating with them in all sorts of matters and using these people, these states against some powers, against sometimes Russia as a bargaining chip, against the United States, against Western bloc. So saying that, look, Turkey is so powerful, we can just do this, we can mediate, or we can be a disruptive power, etc. So, but there is also another element here, that is the Erdogan's alliance with the Turkish nationalist far-right Nationalist Action Party. So for the last 5 years, Erdogan needed this party's support because AKP's votes are decreasing because of the economic problems, etc. So he needed to enter into alliance with this party. And these Turkish nationalists, of course, in their imagination, Azerbaijan is part of Turkey. Of course, they are definitely anti-Armenian, anti-Kurdish, etc. So there is this element there as well. So we know that Aliyev doesn't like Erdogan, and there were some leaked conversations of Aliyev that talking, because he is a secular guy at the end of the day, he's not an Islamist. Look at his lifestyle, etc. But this is a marriage of convenience. So Erdogan found an opportunity window there because in the Azerbaijani national psyche, this Karabakh issue was a huge catastrophe for them, and they wanted to get back these lands. And Erdogan gave them this opportunity because Turkey is a sort of now rogue power, so they don't listen to anyone. They do things in their own way, and because they have a few issues that they can use against the West. For instance, the Syrian refugees. So European Union has to be silent against Turkey. Whatever Erdogan does, European Union has to accept it at the end of the day, to a certain extent, especially with regards to some regional place, unless they are against Greece, etc. They really don't do much about these issues. And with the United States, its geographic location, Turkey's disruptive behavior in NATO, etc., and now offering help protecting Kabul airport in Afghanistan using Turkish military. So there are lots of carrots and sticks there. So Turkey was tolerated to do these things in the region. So this gives Erdogan a sort of bargaining power against Putin as well, because even though Turkey is cooperating with Putin, we all know that Turkey cannot trust Putin or Russia, because in the historical imagination, Russia is one of the biggest enemies. Just only 100 years ago, Russian army was in Istanbul, and just the British Empire stopped them. And they were just very near to the Ottoman Palace. So we know that the Russians would not be a trusted friend. So, but ideologically speaking, I don't think that Azerbaijan and Turkey would come together. They share the same mentality and understanding, but now they need each other.
Thanks, Ihsan. As ever, there's a lot more to unpack, but we're sort of short on time, so we should go to Belgang straight away and then leave time for another question. Belgang.
I'm mute. Yes, congratulations. Thank you for your great talk. My question is about modern transformation of the Turkey. So when the Ottoman Empire faced this both pressure from Russia and United Kingdom, then they choose the kind of a secular nationalist ideology. So my question is that at that time, why Turkey did not choose a socialist route? So currently there are a few socialist parties in Turkey, but at that time, at the turn of the last centuries, why did the Turkey did not choose the socialist paths like the Russia or China? So then if they choose a socialist path, how that would be implication for its citizenship issue? It's a largely the historical question. I was just puzzled when the empire collapsed. So we see that Russia and China, they choose a socialism and revival its empire. But then the Ottoman Empire faced the crisis, existential crisis. Then they didn't choose socialism. So I just wonder why this is in this comparative context.
Yep. This is, of course, a complex issue, and I don't have answers that will satisfy all different perspectives here. But I think the elite is important here. Who were these guys? And if you look at Russia, the revolutionaries were socialists themselves. Yes. And same in China. But in the Turkish case, the revolutionaries or the founders of the Kemalist Republic, they were all pro-Western people.
Yeah.
This was actually a decision made several centuries ago in the Ottoman Empire. So it wasn't the Kemalists in Turkey who invented pro-Western direction, or they were not the guys who started Westernization of Turkey. So what happened in Turkey was that until the 17th, 18th century, Ottoman Empire decided to come up with its authentic native solutions against the Western hegemony, against the Russian expansion, etc., because they were still belittling the Western powers, saying that, oh, they are not worth it, worth studying and analyzing, etc. But by the 18th century, they came up to the conclusion that, okay, they had to emulate the Western powers. But they said, we will not import their morals, their religion, etc., but their technology, their science. So for a while they continued this, but then they realized that without the legal infrastructure, you couldn't do that. So they started transplanting Western laws. And by the end of the 19th century, this is well before the Turkish Republic, all Ottoman laws with the civil code, with the exception of the civil code, they were already Western transplants. So Ottoman Empire, even though it was an Islamic empire, they had European commercial law, European penal law, etc. And the Ottomans created parallel institutions, parallel court structures, for instance, for secular law and for religious law. And the Ottomans also created universities, especially within the military academies that were all Western. So they trained military officers in the Western sphere, in the Western understanding. And as I said, universities, and also they sent many people to European capitals to study, to get educated. And these people became the Westernizer Turkish nationalist elite, and Kemalists are these guys. So they were educated in the Western institutions of the Ottoman Empire. They knew French, they read many Western scholars, philosophers, etc., German, French, British, and so on. So at the end of the day, they loved the Western civilization. They were part of the Western civilization and they wanted to emulate it. And they had also this inferiority complex. And they thought that, okay, we have to be civilized. And when they said civilized, they meant Western civilization. And we have to compete with them, but by simply emulating them. So there was no way that they would be socialist. There were some socialist Ottoman elite as well. And during the independence war, Mustafa Kemal actually talked in socialist terms as well, but just to get support from the Soviet Empire, newly founded Soviet Empire, so that he would use Soviet Empire against the British Empire, so get some help, and he got some help. But then after the independence, he said that, no, we are not socialist, and he actually staged a war a cultural war against the socialists in Turkey, who were already marginal anyway.
I mean, obviously, there's the accidents of history, Ihsan and Balgang, in terms of start points, but it's interesting in 2021 how many parallels we might find between the Communist Party of China and a sort of a state ideology now wrapped up in a cult of personality, and parallels in Turkey. I think at some stage, Ihsan, you should do some sort of comparative work, because the start points are different, the underlying ideologies are notionally quite opposite, but the actual practice is not so dissimilar, perhaps.
You're right. Yeah.
Having said that, Cheng Zhen has his hand up as well, so we can carry on this discussion.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Greg. Congratulations, Ihsan, for the new book. I really also enjoyed your talk. I learned a lot about the history of Turkey, which I know really very little of. I was wondering, between these two state or nation building projects, what kind of factors triggered the transition from the two? For example, whether you think you used the theoretical framework of ontological security. Was wondering whether the Kemalist ontological security project triggered this ontological insecurity among those undesired citizens who took somehow seized the opportunity to fight back, if you like. This kind of ontological insecurity dilemma, if you like. I wonder whether that was the case. And also another question about the tolerated citizens, the new concept, this kind of category in between, whether they are overlap. I think maybe there are some kind of overlaps between the tolerated citizens in the Kemalist nation building project and the Erdoganism project, and how they respond to these different nation building drives.
Okay, thank you, Chengzit. So yeah, actually there is this very vicious cycle of ontological insecurities. So actually, in the conclusion chapter of the book, I talk about these issues, saying that this is a vicious cycle. So Kemalists thought that the Islamists of the Ottoman Empire, the sultanistic system, oppressive Ottoman elite, they oppressed them. They did not allow them to speak openly. They did not allow democracy and pluralism in Turkey. And because of their religiosity, they made Turkey a backward nation, or a country. So they thought they were oppressed by these, and also they thought they were oppressed by the Western powers. So they had these insecurities, fears, anxieties, and siege mentality. And their response was to create, as I said, a homogeneous nation. But when doing this, they oppressed many others, including Turkey's majority, who were religious Sunni Muslims. They were the majority of the people, and Ottoman elite were just in minority. So their parties during the multi-party period would get only 30% of the votes, maximum 35. So that means that 65%, 70% of the society is against you. They are not homo lastus. They are something else. They are either liberal, Democrat, practicing Muslim, Kurdish, Alevi, etc., but not Kemalist. So many of these groups, what they did, and I discussed this in the book, they hid their identities, but they had their grievances, their resentment. And Erdoganist ideology actually is as a resentful ideology. It is about vengeance. It is about taking revenge and just coming back and reclaiming what really belongs to them. I look at Islamist populism here. So this is a new civilizational idea on the basis of not Western civilization, but in competition with it. And there is this animosity between Western civilization and Islamic civilization led by Turkey in the Erdoganist narratives. So these people hid their identities, but they infiltrate the state. They established their own political parties. Initially, they said we are also pro-Western. Of course, we don't have anything against the Kemalist regime. We don't have anything against democracy. We don't have anything against the army. We love Mustafa Kemal, Atatürk, etc. So they simply had to resort to this hiding their identities, dissimulation. And gradually, by using this victimhood politics, they said, look, we are all victims. So when AKP came to power, actually, this was a coalition of victims. So many people who were also oppressed by the Kemalists, they supported the Islamists. So Islamists, when they received 34% of votes in 2001, not all the voters were Islamists. According to all sorts of surveys and polls, Islamists in Turkey at that time were only 7%, maximum 10%. The others who voted for them, there were many liberals, Democrats, pro-European Union people, religious communities, Sunni religious communities, such as the Gülenists that I mentioned, many Kurds, even some Armenians, non-Muslims voted for the AKP because, as I said, this was a coalition of the victims against the Kemalist oppression. But gradually, of course, when the AKP consolidated its power, it simply dismantled this coalition and got rid of some people who became very vocal, very against some policies of the AKP, but he replaced them with newcomers, with new coalition partners. For instance, the ones, the Nationalist Action Party that I mentioned, they're also pro-Kemalist, but with some sticks and carrots, he keeps them within the coalition. But they are not a radical Kemalist. So they are, you could call moderate Kemalists, etc. They are now part of the Islamist coalition. So he uses all these resentments, victimhood, and plays one group against the other. But what's happening now, the new regime is also creating its own victims. So 10 years later, these people will come with a vengeance. They will also say, oh, we've been victimized, you did this to us, so now we will get our revenge, etc. So this is a vicious cycle. And I say that just European Union project, democratization, accepting everybody is just as a human being, a citizen, equal citizen, regardless of their ethnic, religious background, is the only solution. Otherwise, this is a vicious circle and this will continue forever.
Thank you, Ihsan. Ali still has his hand up, but I'm not sure that was from before or whether you wanted to add a new comment, Ali. Ihsan,
no, it's a mistake. Sorry, I'm all good. Sorry, I don't know how to get rid of it.
Okay, well, we'll amputate your raised hand. Okay. Ihsan Yamani, do you want to carry on for a few minutes, or do we need to wrap up at this point?
We're a little bit over time, so I think we might have to wrap up at this point.
Yeah, I guess we need to keep our social contract to keeping these short and sweet at 60 minutes. But I mean, we could easily carry on for another 60 minutes. There's so much to unpack. We haven't talked about India, for example, where there are strong parallels as well, I think.
Oh, absolutely, with the Citizenship Amendment Act. I was thinking the category of tolerated citizens was like bing, bing, bing on my head.
And the undesired citizen as well. I mean, yeah, it maps across quite nicely. And of course, Hindutva ideology is not so very different in many respects in terms of identity politics and authoritarian politics with what we see in Erdogan's Turkey.
Yeah.
And of course, it was our beloved Recep Tayyip Howard who said that we will decide who comes and how they come to Australia 20 years ago. And that bastard is responsible for a lot of the problems we have to this day, unfortunately. But anyway, we don't have time to get into all of that as much as we would like to. So perhaps on another occasion, Ihsan, we can come back to this. You have other books, Yamani as well, and others where we can return to these same themes, because this is this is the stuff of the rest of our lifetime. I think the rest of our careers will be dealing with these issues. And we really need to think strategically about how we push back, how we criticize, and where we can make a positive contribution, because this really impacts on the quality of people's lives.
And safety and sense of security and right to simply be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a life and death matter. It's not just a question of nice to have. It's life and death. So notwithstanding my criticism of Howard's damage to Australians' sense of citizenship, we're still fortunate to live in a democracy, much as it's under pressure at the moment. But I think the thing is, democracy around the world is under pressure, right? And part of the justification for authoritarian terms is this framing of things in identitarian terms that tries to appeal to a group to say, you're okay, you're the good guys, so back us as we turn authoritarian, which is a nasty contract, of course, and a moral failure, but it's tempting at times to just keep quiet and roll with it. Anyway, we don't have time to get into all that. Any final comments, Ihsan?
No, thank you everyone for your patience and for the questions. I learned a lot, and yeah.
And we look forward to comparisons with India and with China, seriously, because there are lots of parallels, different start points and therefore different trajectories, but some strange convergence and congruence.
I think that might happen next month, because Danielle is speaking next month on the published book series, and I'm doing mine on the book in progress.
Excellent. And good to have the Mayor of New York with us. And we didn't hear from you, Emre, but we'll get you back another time to hear from you.
Thank you for having me. Happy 4th of July from New York.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. And happy 4th of July to you. And glad to see New York is looking better. So but keep safe. Thank you all.
Thank you.